Hi everyone, and welcome to the Fake Love and Flying Monkeys podcast. My name's Nova Gibson and I am your host. My area of expertise is in supporting victims and survivors of narcissistic abuse and other toxic relationships. I'm the principal counsellor at Brighter Outlook Narcissistic Abuse Counselling Service, and I'm also the author of Fake Love, Understanding and Healing from Narcissistic Abuse. In this podcast, we're going to be talking about everything from the initial pink cloud you find yourself on at the start through to the horrific discard and the powerful trauma bond that keeps you hooked. So take your imaginary seat on the roller coaster that is narcissistic abuse, and don't forget to subscribe to this podcast so you never miss an episode of Fake Love and Flying Monkeys. Hi everyone, and welcome to another episode of Fake Love and Flying Monkeys. In this episode, we're going to be taking a look at a very common question that I get from my beautiful clients in my practice, which is it narcissism, Nova? Do you think they're a narcissist? Or a very common substitute they tend to bring up is ADHD, or maybe it's something else. Do you really think it's narcissism? Is this why they're treating me so badly? And my general reply to that is, I don't know. I don't diagnose, and I can't diagnose. That would be unethical of me. So what I do is I go through the experiences of my clients, and together we look at the way they're feeling. Are they feeling emotionally safe in this relationship? What behaviors is this person that is hurting them consistently? What behaviors are they exhibiting? And are those behaviors consistent patterns of behavior over space and time? Now, normally what I find is that when people are coming to see me and they know that this is my area of expertise, they have already done their research. They have normally had their light bulb moment, and they have started Googling the behavior of their loved one. And that has to be the biggest red flag you will ever get, because you don't tend to Google the behavior of someone that you are in a healthy relationship with. We don't tend to get on our computers and our phones and start keying in these weird and confusing and hurtful behaviors unless there is something that's going on, and that these behaviors are not just isolated incidents. They are behaviors that are repeated, and they are toxic. So it's that word that I want you to focus on, toxic, rather than looking at the label of narcissism. And that might sound very strange when I'm talking about narcissistic abuse all the time. But the reason I say that is because when you focus on that label, and it's highly likely that you will never get a diagnosis, what that means is you are never going to be proven right in any type of research that you come across which relates to narcissism and the behaviors of your loved one. But what it also means is that you're not going to be proven wrong. You have to trust your instincts. What you need to do is to remember that the narcissist conditioned you over time to not trust yourself and to be in a constant state of confusion, and to turn to the very person who distorted your reality with that ongoing gaslighting, to turn to them for what your reality is. So number one, you're rarely going to get a diagnosis unless it's court ordered, simply because narcissists do not believe there's anything wrong with themselves. And number two, you are really having trouble trusting what you're seeing, what you're hearing, what you're believing. And much of the time, you don't want to believe what you're seeing and what you're hearing and what you're reading, because what that would mean if all of these boxes that you're ticking, which indicates that this person you're researching is in fact narcissistic, what that would mean is that this whole relationship was based on a lie, and that this person is pretending to be the person of your dreams, or they're pretending to be someone else that makes you feel good and deflects from the person they are, which is the person that is consistently abusing you. That reality that this person might not be who you think they are, this person that you love, that is an incredibly hard concept to wrap your head around. And it's far easier for your brain to go down the track of something you've been conditioned to do, which is to not trust yourself and to think that there might be some other reason for why they are treating you so badly. So you will regularly hear me tell you that you are the expert in your trauma, and that a diagnosis is a label. It's a label that we give to a set of symptoms, a set of traits, so that we know what treatment to apply. And it is very, very hard to get a narcissist into a setting where they are going to be diagnosed, if not impossible. So you are not going to get the diagnosis that would prove what you're reading and hearing. So this is why you have to trust your instincts. If you are doing the research and you have engaged in researching the behavior of this loved one, then what that means is that you are not feeling safe. You are not feeling, at the very least, emotionally safe, and you are looking for answers. So what does Google tell you? What does the narcissistic abuse recovery experts say on YouTube, etc.? They support what you have been going through. You watch those videos, you read those blogs, and all of a sudden you start to see the light. You have your light bulb moment. You find those 9 traits as listed in the DSM, and oh my goodness, they tick nearly every box, remembering they only have to tick 5 of those narcissistic traits to actually be potentially diagnosed with NPD. But it's not those very general 9 traits that you find in the DSM that makes every narcissistic abuse victim really think that this is what they have been going through, and that they have finally got some kind of answer as to what they've been going through. There's a name for this. They're not going crazy like their abuser told them. It's all of those behaviors that you see in case studies and other victim statements and videos, which tell you that this is your life. These behaviors seem textbook from relationship to relationship, whether that's with a parent, a colleague, a friend, or an intimate partner. They all seem to engage in exactly the same strategies, very, very covert most of the time, to confuse and abuse their victims. So that is what you have to rely on in the instance where you do not have a diagnosis. But what you have to remember is what I said earlier, and that is that the word narcissist, the diagnosis of NPD, is a label, and you are not going to get that. So trusting what you're reading and researching, that is going to become a new skill that you have to acquire. It's something that you were stripped of when your personality was dismantled, so to speak, so that the narcissist could make you easier to manipulate and abuse. So you've started to research and you've come up with that word narcissist, and it all starts to make sense. Or perhaps someone else has mentioned the word because you've told them over and again about these behaviours of this person you love who is hurting you. But does that make you feel better? Does it make you feel better that they might be a narcissist and therefore you know they're not going to change? This research is telling you that narcissists don't change. So it's far too easy to think that what you are going through with this person may not be their fault. It may not be narcissism after all, and there may be some other reason which they just can't control. Therefore, you might be able to change them. You might be able to fix them. So the name of this episode is it narcissism, or is it ADHD, or is it something else? Now, ADHD stands for Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder. And this is, as I said earlier, a very common one that people bring up, hoping much of the time that it's this rather than narcissism, because that would mean it's not the fault of their loved one. They're not abusing them intentionally. So symptoms of ADHD include constantly fidgeting, being hyperactive, excessive physical movement, excessive talking, being unable to wait their turn, acting without thinking, being impulsive. And if you think about it, it's really easy to especially assign those impulsive behavioral traits, the acting without thinking, to someone who is engaging in narcissistic behavior, because it's something that you would not do yourself. You would never engage in those behaviors that hurt another person. So if this person is acting without thinking and they can't control that, if there is some kind of difference in their brain, in the way their brain is wired, that means it's not their fault. Now, these are very general behaviours associated with ADHD that I'm talking about. I need to make it clear that I am not an expert on this disorder. But if we're looking at, or if a victim is looking at in particular, the impulsivity, the inability to control their actions, and interrupting and acting without thinking about the consequences of their actions, that's much easier to come to terms with rather than someone who is narcissistic, someone who has pathological narcissism, which means they know what they're doing, they just don't care because they think that you deserve it. It's much easier to assign those hurtful, toxic behaviors to something that's out of your abuser's control. For example, ADHD. Now, another disorder that my clients often mention is bipolar disorder. Bipolar meaning polarized behavior, where the victim will engage in or they will have extreme mood swings. It's a mental health condition that causes these cycles of manic behavior where they're on the go all the time, they're elated, or maybe they're irritable and angry all the time, or they're just full of energy and they just have all of this increased energy and activity. And the other side of that, or the polarized side of that, is the depressive episodes where the victim will then suffer periods of just feeling absolutely hopeless, depressed, sad, and they just have very, very little drive, energy, or just the willingness to engage in any type of activity. So it kind of makes sense that people would find this disorder if they're looking for another answer, rather than that word narcissism, which means that this person they love abuses them with willingness and without empathy, and that they know what they're doing and they can control it depending on who is watching. If this person has bipolar, where they're flipping from being aggressive and being irritable and on the go all the time to completely the opposite behavior, where they're being nice, then those behaviors are also polarized. And victims very often will find that disorder and think that this switch in the behaviors of their loved one, like a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, could be because this person has bipolar disorder. Once again, that would make it not their fault. Now, once again, I need to make it clear I'm not an expert on bipolar disorder, but my general understanding as a layperson is that people that suffer with this often chronic and debilitating mental health condition engage in these behaviors, these polarized behaviors, not for seconds at a time. My understanding is that when someone is going through a manic phase, these behaviors can often go for days, sometimes even weeks, and then they will literally drop into the complete opposite, the polarized behavior, in that they will become deflated and sad without any energy levels whatsoever, which will also potentially last for days or weeks. And the other thing to remember is that this is a mental health condition. It is something that can be prescribed medication for. It is something that people can't help, and it can really have a negative impact on their life. But there is help out there for those people who suffer with this. And most people with bipolar disorder would do anything not to have it, because it does have such a negative impact on their life. In other words, they can look at the behaviors that they engage in with this mental health condition that they're aware of most of the time, or if they have been diagnosed, and they can seek help for that. And it is something that they don't willingly inflict on someone else. It is something that they are receiving the negative impacts of. And the reason I say that is because NPD is one of the few disorders where the person who has the disorder is literally the only person who is not negatively impacted. It is everyone who is around the person with NPD who finds themselves in therapy. Now, other types of disorders or addictions or problematic behaviours that people bring up are things like alcoholism or drug taking. And they think, well, maybe if they just stop drinking, then they would be different. They would treat me better. And maybe it's the alcohol that's making them abuse me. And therefore, once again, I can help them. I can fix them. And if it's the alcohol that's doing it, or if it's the drugs that is doing it, it's something external. It's not the fault of this person I love. It's something they can't control. But what many of those people find out later down the track, if the narcissist has a period of sobriety, is that if they did have a short period of changed behavior, in other words, manipulative behavior to hook their victim back in, they reverted straight back to the abusive baseline behavior. They just didn't have the alcohol or the drugs there to use as an excuse. Of course, excessive drinking, drug taking is going to make it worse, because it makes them more impulsive, and of course it loosens their inhibitions, and they're more likely to be even more abusive than if they had been engaging in those toxic behaviors without the added effect of those drugs. So circling back, is it narcissism, or is it ADHD, or is it something else? Now, the narcissist in your life may get a diagnosis from someone, a professional, for ADHD or bipolar disorder, or they may go to a treatment center for their alcoholism, etc. But then you find out later, as most people do, that the toxic behaviors remain. If they don't, and they have sought treatment, if those addictions prove to be what was causing their toxic behaviors, which you will find out because the abuse will stop for good, or it will gradually die down as they get support and they seek therapy and help. And then you will know that it was one of those other things. But if those things go and you see that those toxic behaviors return, then you will know that you have to trust your instincts, because the baseline behaviors that continue over time and hurt you so much mean that this person is abusing you. And that is the bottom line. It can be ADHD and alcoholism or something like that that's making it worse. But if their baseline personality is that of a person who inflicts harm on you, knowing that it's hurting you because you're telling them, and they don't stop, they change their behavior for a very brief time to manipulate you back into the cycle of abuse. If this is the person you are with, it is not your job to try and change them or fix them. It is your job to protect yourself. It is your job to leave. Now, it's really important to remember that narcissists manipulate. And I hear it so often when they do get that diagnosis of something that's more acceptable, which can be related to something external. It's not their fault. They can't control it, such as their addictions or ADHD or bipolar. Not to say that they don't actually have those things, but a manipulative narcissist will use those diagnoses as an excuse to abuse you. So the bottom line is no one has the right to abuse you, whether they have ADHD or bipolar or something else, especially when you are telling them, you are hurting me, and it's happening again and again and again. If you're not yet ready to label them as a narcissist, then label them as toxic. Ask yourself, am I emotionally safe? Do I feel emotionally safe in this relationship? If the answer is no, then it is not your job to wait around until they fix themselves. And also remember that if someone is truly aware that they're hurting you and they want to stop, they will do something about it. And of course, a narcissist will not change. They will stop for a very brief time and then they will just go back to their baseline behavior. So those are the questions I want you to ask yourself. If this person knows they are hurting you, and they will know because you are telling them, they will see you crying and struggling and frustrated and confused. If they know they are hurting you and they do not have the awareness or the care factor to change their behavior, if they blame you for their abusive behavior, if they blame their disorder and do nothing about it, do not seek help, do nothing to change the fact that they may lose you if they keep hurting you, then this is a toxic relationship. And despite any diagnoses that you may have, this person is showing you that they don't care enough to seek help or change those behaviors which are hurting the person they purport to love. So the bottom line, once again, is you have to trust your instincts. If you're not yet ready to label them as a narcissist, despite your research, then label them as toxic. Don't let any other disorders that they may or may not have give them an excuse to abuse you. It is not okay for anyone to abuse you. And you can reevaluate your diagnosis of what they have or how you want to label them from a safe distance whilst they engage in therapy and seek help to change those behaviors which are hurting other people. So in summarizing, guys, I thought it was important to do this episode simply because so many victims, especially in the early days when they're still very much trauma bonded to their abuser, tend to look for reasons that this may not be the fault of this person they love. They may be abusing them, but it may be something that they're just unaware of, and it makes the victim feel better. It makes them feel better about having been in this relationship for so long. It makes them feel better about not having left earlier, or maybe they think that the person they loved in the beginning will come back. It feels better to think that they have something that means they weren't abusing you intentionally. But what I want you to really dig deep and ask yourself is, in the end, does it really matter if they're abusing me? Because in the end, if someone is abusing you, confusing you, manipulating you, either covertly or overtly, consistently over time, the outcome is the same. You are a victim of abuse, and you do not deserve that. You deserve to be happy. And you can only do that when you are in an environment where you can heal away from the person who is abusing you. And that brings us to the end of yet another Fake Love and Flying Monkeys episode. I hope you found that episode insightful, guys. It's so confusing when you find these other disorders where the behaviours are quite similar. But it's important to trust your instincts and to look at patterns of behavior over space and time. Remembering this person can see that they're hurting you, and always remembering that no one has the right to abuse you, no matter who they are. Okay, so guys, if you would like to have a one-on-one Zoom counseling session with me, please see my website in the description. And as always, don't forget to get your copy of my best-selling book, Fake Love, Understanding and Healing from Narcissistic Abuse. You can also find a link where you can grab your copy now in the description. On that note, it's bye from me for now. Until tomorrow's episode, remember, you are worthy of love, and you are worthy of so much more than a lifetime of fake love and flying monkeys.